What is going on, Badger fans? We got Curtis Holland jumping on the show. We are talking big recruiting wins, beating marquee programs, total number of maybe takes in this class potentially, and also why you shouldn't get so hung up on last year when looking at this season. All that and more on today's Locked On Badgers. Let's go.
You are Locked On Badgers, your daily podcast on the Wisconsin Badgers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, Badger fans? Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being a part of the community. Thank you for a little bit of your time. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, FanDuel's hooking up all customers, all of you, with a boost daily this summer. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. And we are bringing that dude. We are bringing Playmaker on, Mr. Curtis Holland joining the show. It's been a little bit since we last talked. Wanted to talk a little bit about recruiting, something that was kind of in your mind in terms of beating marquee opponents for prospects and maybe some outside noise minimizing that a little bit.
Yeah, Ryan, thanks for having me on again. Yeah, I mean, one of the things I was, we were talking about this on the Discord for a while, and the last, couple of weeks have obviously been awesome for us. We've, made a number of players our priority, and the staff has gone out, executed in their recruiting plans, and we've signed them, which is awesome. But Wisconsin's history, obviously, with recruiting, it hasn't always been the most storied. We've spent a lot of time getting under the radar guys that you got to develop and build into top tier guys so that, their junior, senior years, they're starters and we have a solid season. That's kind of been our MO for forever. And a lot of teams, you look at teams like Ohio State's and Georgia's and Texas's, and it feels like, what they're doing is finding more ready-made guys who can, who have all the athletic intangibles, who can really hit the ground running and immediately add impact to their team. And that, by extension, it drives their class rankings up. On top of that, you look at the top end guys. The way that the composite in 247 is rated is such that when you get a 5-star player or a really high-level player, it completely elevates your class. It's almost disproportionately so. And not to say that those guys obviously don't add a ton of value, they do. But that's something that a lot of these big programs tend to get, And so, for example, we look back at, I believe it was our 2019 class when we got Logan Powell. Logan Brown, excuse me. We had one 5-star, that was him. And then we had 2 4-star players. And then the rest were all 3-stars. And we were one of the top 25 classes. And it was literally on the weight of Logan Brown. Logan Brown. Oh my God, there's too many Logans. I'm going to get this all messed up. It's Logan Bruss, Logan Brown. I don't know.
Yep. All offensive linemen.
Exactly. Logan's, it works for offensive line, I guess. But that elevated our class substantially more than what the aggregate, probably average recruiting ranking was. And so, over the last few years, we spent a lot of time finding guys we got to work on. Well, that hasn't changed a ton in what Luke Fickell's trying to do. The difference is, instead of finding guys who are maybe under the radar, more polished as a player, but maybe lacking a little bit in athletic upside, we're finding guys who aren't polished, but have a ton of athletic upside, right? And so we make them our number one players because these are the kinds of guys that can turn into first-round draft picks once they hit their potential as a football player, right? And so the athletic foundation is there. These are guys that could probably be basketball players. They could probably be soccer players. They could probably do anything because they're just raw athletes. But you train them, you coach them as football players, and they become elite in that space. And therefore, those guys became our top priorities. Well, the reality is a lot of the top teams look for those same types of players. Now, maybe a Texas or a USC has access to maybe a more highly skilled athletic upside player. But in general, the types of 3-stars they're signing are in the same mold. They're high upside athletic guys. And the hope with that they're trying to do is hit gold on a number of guys who could turn into be future draft picks. But the one thing I wanted to note was it feels like the narrative around Wisconsin recruiting hasn't changed such that, well, we landed this guy from Florida, Nick Clayton. Yeah, he was kind of a Florida State lean, but honestly, Florida State didn't really want him that much. Now, I know, and I know from various sources that was entirely untrue. Mm-hmm. But the narrative hasn't changed. And my thing is, I think we as fans need to give the staff more credit. They're going out and winning guys. This isn't this is the last resort, so he chose Wisconsin. No, this is our staff goes out, finds the guy they want, makes him a priority, and then sells him and wins him. Mm-hmm. That's what we're doing. We're not just taking the scraps from these D1 programs. No, we're picking the guys we want to get. We're making them a priority and we're getting them. And I think that to me is the most impressive thing that this staff has done so far.
Yeah, that's really well said. And I agree. You look at some of the guys like Posa. Posa's a guy that could have gone to a lot of places. They shut that down. Logan Powell, speaking of another Logan, that's a guy that had visits set up, right? They shut that down. Clayton was definitely a guy that had interest down there. They shut that down. And then here's the other one. I love your point about you get the toolsy guys and then you kind of have to refine that a little bit. It almost reminds me of like the elite schools. They're going to car auction and they're buying the pristine, car that's already finished and done. What we're doing is we're finding that same type of car, but it's been in the garage it's been in the barn for a while and it just needs a little bit of work, but it has that same type of upside. Almost think of the Fast and the Furious. Remember the first one where he brings the beaten up sports car into the garage and they're like, what's this? He's like, that's your 6-second car. Well, Brady Collins is Vin Diesel and he's going to turn some of these pieces into, by the way, if people have never seen the Fast and the Furious, I apologize. You're not going to get this reference, but they're finding the same type of upside that just needs a little bit of work. And I think that's how you have to compete. The other part that I think is interesting that you hit on is the relationships. So they're also getting into some of these players before some of the blue bloods can. Brendan Haynes is a guy that had Tennessee's kicking the tires there. Samuel Leteju is a guy Penn State is trying to kick the tires there. But we've already landed those guys and built those relationships. So they're getting ahead of the curve a little bit as well.
Yeah, I mean, and from a guy who's been in sales for 6-7 years now, one of the things I think that's the most interesting to me is that you have these big brands, right? And they don't really have to try as hard to recruit a guy because they're a big brand. Ohio State, it's Ohio State. They show up at the door, you're going to answer, right? Wisconsin, you might have to knock a few times. You might have to call before you go up and show up. You might have to do a little bit extra work. But because of that, I genuinely believe we have significantly better recruiters on our staff than on a lot of these top tier staffs because they have to be, right? It's kind of the same thing with the coaching. I made this comment in the Discord as well. We have to have better X's and O's coaches in order to compete at the highest level. And I know you've mentioned this before, but Kirby Smart, his whole thing is, look, let me just get the best players at every position and then run, good scheme. Basically, I mean, they run a good scheme. I'm not trying to discount what they do, but it's not the most complex thing in the world. They don't do anything super crazy. They just get the best players on the field and make you beat them. And most people can't because they have the best players. Mm-hmm. And whereas for Wisconsin, what we have to do is we have to be able to out scheme guys. We have to be able to out recruit guys because we're working from a little bit of a lower level on the totem pole. And so for me, again, like I look at what this staff has been doing. They're getting in with guys, they're building relationships, and they're doing it the right way. They're building these foundations the right way, so that when a Tennessee comes knocking and says, "Hey, I'm Tennessee," a recruit might look at him like a Brendan Hayes might look at him and say, "Great, like what? I don't know what that means. That doesn't really mean a lot. It's like cool that you're Tennessee. That's a great school. I appreciate the offer, but nah, I'm good. I got a relationship with these guys. They've been working with me the whole time. They've been doing all the things to build the relationships and develop a plan for me where I'm going to fit into the team moving forward. And so that's the things I think that we have done well. And quite frankly, the last 2 years, I don't think there's really a guy that's been on our board that we've talked about that this team has really wanted that we haven't gotten. Maybe one or two here or there. But I mean, I think about it. I remember we were talking about this last year. It was Dylan Jones, Atuka, Darren Dupree. Well, Darren Dupree's got an Alabama offer. Oh, there's 3 running backs. How are we going to get 3 running backs? Oh, this guy's too good. He's never going to come to Wisconsin. All 3 came, and they're all excited about going. Ernest Willer. We were all like, oh, man, there's no chance we're going to get a good D lineman. Bam, signing day, Ernest Willer. Dylan Johnson was going to Northwestern. Now, there was some other things going on with that one, but ultimately, he was a guy the staff wanted. We got him. You look at this class, Eugene Hilton. Who's a 4-star receiver going to go to Wisconsin? A son of an NFL Pro Bowler? What are you talking about? He was all Wisconsin basically from his visit. I'm beginning to believe, and again, this is just me reading tea leaves. I don't have any intel on this, but it feels like Hardy Watts is ours to lose. I mean, if you read his report on 247 coming out of our visit versus coming out of Michigan's visit, you would have think that Wisconsin was the greatest place on earth, and Michigan was like, yeah, they were nice to him. They gave him free food and stuff, and he met a lot of players who thought they were cool. But in our review, he's dropping names. He's talking about Logan Powell. He's talking about Kevin Haywood. He's talking about Brady Collins. He's being specific. He's saying, this is what their plan for me was. Madison was awesome. Like, I loved everything about it. And like, those are the things to me that signal this staff is doing the right things in recruiting, and that the guys we're targeting, we're winning. We're not winning them because, Clemson decided they didn't want them. We're winning them because No, we're genuinely just winning. And that's kind of how I see it.
Yeah, I think we, and I say we as in Wisconsin, I'm obviously not on the staff, but I think Wisconsin wins in the areas of relationship building. They win in the areas of people. They win in the areas of authenticity, right? Where other schools, to your point, Ohio State can win on brand power. They can win on NFL pedigree. They can win on history. I think we're at a point, Wisconsin is, where they can go toe-to-toe with anybody when it comes to relationship building and outwork just about anybody. And that puts us in the driver's seat for a lot of players that other schools in our tier, and there's a lot of schools in our tier, Iowa's, think of Utah's, those kind of things. I think we're a tier above those for the most part because we have Max and Pat, because we have Casey Rybach, because we have Fickell. And I think it gives us an advantage because we have Brady Collins. Every single offensive line recruit I talk to says Brady Collins. Like, I cannot wait to work with that dude. It's like you've mentioned this before, Ben Herbert. It's like we have got back to that point where we have a strength and conditioning guy that we can lean on that feels like an asset, right? Feels like a selling point. And you need that because we're not going to beat Ohio State on pedigree. We're not going to beat Michigan on pedigree. But we can beat them in these other areas. All right, we got to take a quick break there. I want to come back. It's always awesome when you get Curtis on. We're going to come back. We're going to talk about year 2 in Fickell. Why does it feel like the media is excited for year 2 of the Matt Rule era, but kind of down on the year 2 of the Luke Fickell era? We're going to talk about that next on Locked On Badgers. But first, a quick break for our friends of the show over at FanDuel. FanDuel remains the number one source for all your sports betting needs. Everything you want from a sports book. There's a reason we use it at the Locked On Network. There's a reason I use it at the Locked On Network. It is the fastest, easiest, simplest, most efficient, cleanest way for all your sports betting. Quick payouts. Plus, right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on spreads, parlays, teasers, futures. We've talked about it. I'm way over on the Badgers. I think it's 6.5. Win-loss total over under. I think they're going to get 8. That's kind of my initial guess. So there's a futures bet there. Obviously, baseball's going on right now if you're into that. A lot of stuff. Football's coming up if you want to put a futures on, maybe Green Bay or anything like that. Go over at FanDuel.com/lockedon. Spice up your sports weekend. Please do it responsibly over at FanDuel.com/lockedon. Okay, let's get Curtis back on the show. As always, appreciate his insights. Let's talk about this because you and I both, I think you and I are on the same page here. We both like Matt Rule. We both think that's a good hire. I think he's going to add toughness and consistency to the Huskers. They're going to be going back to bowl games. But it feels like the media is super stoked for year 2 of the Matt Rule era, and they've kind of brushed off year 2 of the Luke Fickell era. And I think we're on the same boat with this.
Yeah, I find it interesting. I mean, first of all, Nebraska's won the offseason for the past 10 years straight. So I don't think they're going to change that narrative anytime soon. But when I look at Nebraska, I think the big thing, the reason why people are optimistic is they got Dylan Raiola, and Dylan Raiola, you watching their spring game. I mean, the dude's got a howitzer for an arm.
Mm-hmm.
It just flies out of his hand. I mean, he's probably the most athletic quarterback they've had ever, and they've had Heisman winning quarterbacks. So I think that they're going to do well with him, and I think Matt Rule is the guy, to rein him in and to get that team right. I think that's going to be a good team. There's no doubt in my mind they're going to probably be one of the better teams in the conference this year. But that said, yeah, I mean, it's interesting. You look at what Luke Fickell came into and had to do. I think part of the issue was the perception was that, well, it's Wisconsin. This is a 9-win team every year. And I think because we're more dialed into what's been going on, there was a lot of cracks in that foundation, a lot of things that needed to get fixed. Maybe some players that needed to move on, and maybe some mindsets that needed to shift a little bit. And so from the outside look, it's like going back to your car analogy. It's like you see that brand new, 2024 Dodge Charger, but then when you get under the hood, you're like, wow, there's a crack in the engine block. This car's a lemon. Like what am I looking at? Like, there's a lot of issues with it, and it's not an easy fix. It's going to take some time. And so I think, again, all of this is on paper without seeing, we didn't really get an opportunity to see a spring game this year, and obviously all you have really to go on is last year. But when you get under the hood, or when you see what they're talking about, the things that Luke Fickell and them have been talking about in the offseason, the things that you're seeing on paper coming in, a lot of it is just, we had to shift the mindset. And now it feels like, looking at spring, you had the Cincinnati boys coming in saying, hey, this is what we look like in 2020, 2021, when we had that edge to us. We had that attitude that allowed us to win close games. This is the kind of edge we were looking for. Last year, we didn't see that. That's consistent across the board. You have our freshmen coming in with a different mindset. Every single one of them saying, hey, we're going to win a title here. And they genuinely believe it. It's not like, oh, we're going to win a title. I'm going to, be a, millionaire tomorrow and go hang out with Ryan Serhant and sell all the properties in New York. Like, it's like, yeah, maybe, but like the reality is these guys are genuinely believing what they're being told. And I think that's important in understanding, how high a team can go, because if you can't see the vision, if you can't believe that, you'll never get there. And so going back to kind of Matt Rule and Luke Fickell, one of the things I've seen, parried around a bit online and on Twitter is, Matt Rule is one of those coaches that every time, his second year, man, there's no other coach in the country that can turn around a program like Matt Rule. He brought Temple from 3-9 to 6-6, 11-3, or he brought Baylor from 3-9 to 6-7 or whatever, and then like 11-2 or whatever they were the year with Baylor. And it's like Luke Fickell went to Cincinnati. His first year, they were 4-8. They sucked. And he admitted as much that they sucked. And then same thing he did here. He flipped the team around, changed the culture, up the ante in terms of competitiveness. The next year, they went 11-2. They went 11-2 in 2018, 2019. They went 9-1, 2020. The only loss was to Georgia by 7 points. And then they went 13-1, obviously lost to Bama, who they played Bama better than Ohio State did in the national championship the year before. And that was 4 years straight of 11-plus win equivalent with 2020 win seasons. And the only time he fell off was in 2022 when they lost 16 NFL draft picks. And they still went 9-3. So, to me, it's like this guy knows how to win. And so a lot of people say, well, this was the AAC. This isn't Power 5. It's different here. He didn't have to compete with the top programs. It's like, well, first of all, when he got to the AAC, you had UCF, you had Memphis, you had SMU, you had Houston. All these teams were perennial powers in that league. And they're all in better recruiting spots, mind you. He went, built the best roster, became the best program, overcame the different skills that these teams had, and ended up dominating that league for 4 years straight. On top of that, before that, he was at Ohio State, which I would argue, and I think most people would argue, is one of the best, if not the best, well-run program in the country, arguably with some of these other SEC teams. And he saw 2 national titles under 2 different legendary coaches. He saw multiple coaching philosophies. He's seen the best players the sport had to offer. He's coached the best players the sport had to offer. He knows what good looks like, right? And so he's not just going to blow smoke for the sake of blowing smoke when he speaks about our team, because he knows what it takes to reach the mountaintop. He knows what that looks like. He's been there. He's done that. So that, to me, tells me all I need to know about a lot of things going into the next season. And we could talk a little about record predictions and things like that. Obviously, we're not a perfect team. There's a lot of holes we still got to address. But I just think that, to kind of look at us and say, well, it's 6.5 win total. To me, that's just Vegas sort of writing off Luke Fickell as a coach in general and just saying, screw it, punting on this season for Wisconsin.
Yeah, it's disrespectful in a way. And let me go back to your AAC point quick. He was doing that with the resources within that conference as well. Like it's, when people write it off, well, you didn't do that in big boy football, but he didn't have big boy football resources either. Like you have to understand the context of what he did there. And he rebuilt that program with limited resources. And now he's in a bigger conference. Yes, but he is also at a place with infinitely better resources and funding and facilities and alumni support and history and pedigree. He's never had, well, I shouldn't say never, obviously Ohio State, but he's only there for that 1 year. He's never, as a head coach, had this type of consistent resource level. I think the other thing I kind of want to talk to you about, and it goes exactly in line with what you're saying, it feels like the media, you mentioned that, it feels like Vegas, it feels like fans are too hung up, media too, and I'm not, like, everyone has a right to feel how you want to feel, but it feels like people are too hung up on last year, and they almost don't even want to get excited at points, and I'm talking more from a national perspective or a media perspective about what's coming up this potential season, because they were burned last year. And I just don't think last year has anything to do with this year. Last year is, it's almost a one-off. You have to put it in a box because it's his first year here. This year, it's a new quarterback, new coaches, a new transfer portal haul. They've redid the linebacker room. They've come in, they've seen the weaknesses. They've addressed those weaknesses. It's year 2 for Longo, for that quarterback room, for the offensive line. I think we upgraded at the coaching spots in both line spots probably. I just think, man, people are way too hung up on what happened last year, and they're not giving this year a fair look. Do you agree with that or disagree?
Yeah, I agree. I think the thing is you have to look at each season in its own world, because the landscape is different every single year. I mean, I remember, and I think I mentioned this even the last show I had. The case in point of this to me was 2021 Michigan State. it was so funny to me because, Michigan State's kind of in a similar position to us. They had a lot of success in the mid 2020s. We're a really good program under D'Antonio, started to fade at the end. And they go and they hire Mel Tucker, right? Former Badger. I'll just leave it at that. But they go and hire Mel Tucker. And he goes 11-2. And the entire offseason, Michigan State. I mean, the top 3 in the Big Ten East. Again, it's Ohio State, Michigan State. They forgot about Penn State because Penn State was 6-6 or 7-6 or whatever they were that year. So they completely forgot about them. They didn't even exist. But Michigan State was like, oh my God, that's the team. Like, who's going to step up to Michigan State? Wisconsin, they're not going to be Michigan State. Like, what is this? And the next year they go like 3-7, and Mel Tucker gets fired, and they were terrible. So it's like that's the kind of thing where it's like the media gets caught up on these narratives based on things in the past that have absolutely nothing to do with the year coming up. This year is completely separate from last year on 10,000 different ways, least of which is we have a brand new quarterback who's entirely different than Mordecai is. Now, I don't judge the media for saying I don't know how how Tyler Van Dyke's going to do. Quite frankly, I don't think really anybody does. He's had moments that were Heisman worthy. I don't if I look at the Big Ten roster of quarterbacks right now, who's going to throw 5 touchdowns against Texas A&M of all the starters?
I mean, so
honestly,
but that's the question, right? There's probably
that's the high. That's the high, and then the low is the low, which is really bad. So it's like,
I'd say this though. I'm not convinced Tyler Van Dyke would do it again either. Like, how many big quarterbacks would consistently do that?
But that's the thing, and so it's like that's where it's like when I look at this, Tyler Van Dyke to me is the biggest wild card on this team. If he hits, we're off to the races. But if he doesn't, well, we're kind of back to square zero where we kind of were before. But the reality is, I mean, on the side of that, at least we know we have Braden Locke as a floor, which is a pretty good floor to have. I think he, for him being a redshirt freshman last year, being a little bit of a deer in headlights, he performed admirably, especially against probably the best defenses we played, Indiana withstanding last season. But overall, it's like I saw Tyler Van Dyke absolutely carve apart what is an elite athletic defense in Texas A&M. They weren't the best version of themselves last year, but they have athletes across the board. They were top 1-2 classes for the last few years. That was a good team, and I don't think there's a Big Ten quarterback that would be able to replicate that success. And so but then you got to look at the same time on the downside is his lows were very, very low. And so it's tough to say which version are we going to get? Where's he going to land? So I can get the hesitancy there, but when you look at, this team has been 7-5, they're 7-5, they lose to Iowa 2 years in a row. Iowa has been the same team for the last 5 years. I think I said this before. The difference is the conference has gone up and down around them. That's really the main difference there. But Iowa's still Iowa. You look at a USC that's coming in, they're still trying to figure out how to play defense and how to man up in the trenches. They're going to have a tough time with that this year. And even if they beat us, early in the year, I don't see that team doing much better than 7-5, 8-4 themselves, because this is going to be a new type of experience for them. So that'll be interesting. Penn State still got a lot to prove in terms of, being able to step up to the big games, to play up to what I think their athletic potential is, so there's a lot of question marks around the league. I just think that Wisconsin keeps getting underlooked because when you look at what we've done in the last few years, we were dealing with a lot of baggage and we had to kind of offload that before we can move forward. And so that's why I think coming into this year, we're going to shock a lot of people.
No, I definitely think we're overlooked. I would say this, though, when I look at the rest of the Big Ten, I can see the optimism from a lot of those schools as well, because it requires for schools outside of probably Oregon and Ohio State, it all requires some narrative framing, right? Like if you're USC, you're saying we're replacing a number 1 overall draft pick, but when has Lincoln Riley had a bad quarterback and now we got a real defensive coordinator, right? That's what they're saying. Okay, I buy that road to optimism. If you're Iowa, you're saying, well, the defense is always going to be good, and we finally moved out of the shadow of that offensive coordinator we had. It's got to be at least a little better, and they're probably right on that. It probably will be at least a little better. Right, if you're Penn State, you're saying we have a dynamic group of running backs. If you're Nebraska, it's the 5-star quarterback, plus some real new dynamic weapons on the outside that they brought in the portal. Northwestern, look at what Braun did last year in kind of a weird year. Now giving them another full season, right? So I think you look at the narrative from a lot of these schools, and for Wisconsin, it's year 2 in Luke Fickell. It's the linebacker core is going to be so much better. Veteran defensive back group. I just see that each fan base can find that silver road, which is always spring, right? It's always summer. It's like
everyone's undefeated still, so it's a good year. And fun fact, Tim Lester was actually quarterback at my high school, won a state title back in the 90s.
What's he like?
I don't know him. I didn't know him personally, but yeah, that was he played for oh my God, I'm gonna mess this up, and my classmates are gonna hate me. His last name was Thorne. He was the head coach of North Central Illinois, and then North Central went on after he retired to win a couple national titles themselves. Legendary coach at my high school. His grandson's actually Peyton Thorne at Auburn right now. But so interesting connections there. That aside the point. Yeah, I mean everybody right now is undefeated, so everybody can believe whatever narratives they want to believe. The reason I feel so strongly about Luke Fickell is, again, of those narratives you just named, who's actually been to the mountaintop? Who's actually seen what it takes to get there?
It's a good point.
Who's actually built a program that sustained success for more than 1 year, or been a part of a program, a la Ohio State, that has basically had 9-win seasons written stone since the 50s. I mean, it's a different mind. It's just a different set of knowledge. Like, you're working with different tools, and so that's kind of where it's like, for me, I take his word a little bit. Now, the only other person I would say, like, when I listen to them, I'm like, okay, I kind of take his word for it. It's probably Kirk Ferentz. He's been around so long. He knows what good and bad looks like too. But Matt Rule, again, and Matt Rule's a great coach, and he's been a part of great teams, great staffs in the past. But his last experience was struggling in the NFL and going to Baylor and bringing them up, but like ultimately not reaching the mountaintop there. You look at Lincoln Riley, he's been to the playoffs and progressively gotten worse in the playoffs every time he was there. And like you look at, his teams, they got offensive potential, but it's like, I don't know, I'm just not sold on Lincoln Riley yet as a program until he figures out how to run a program with the defense in mind as well as the offense. And you look at Dan Lanning, a lot of optimism with him. I can't really say much against him. He knows what it takes to be successful. I think he's going to do tremendous. I think, he's the kind of guy that this is going to be my thought and my hope. If Ohio State decides to move on from Ryan Day down the road, he's their first target. I hope that's him, not Luke Fickell. But yeah, exactly. But like, again, but then you look around the league, like, I mean, David Braun, great guy, dude. He did tremendous things at North Dakota State. Northwestern's got a lot of things they got to work through. And quite frankly, that was our worst game all season.
It was horrible.
It was bad. It was a bad experience. So you can look at all the narratives, and all these narratives make sense. And it's the off season. It's just when I look at what Luke Fickell's done, the staff, his pedigree, the staffs he's built, the work, you see how they work in recruiting. To me, what he says, the way you do anything is the way you do everything. And when they're putting that level of emphasis into their effort behind recruiting, into evaluating coaching candidates, into getting the people they're getting, that tells me they're paying that level of attention to the actual X's and O's football coaching too, right? And if they're doing that, he has that experience of knowing what it takes to get to the top, knowing what it takes to be good in the past. And then just combine that with overall, the narratives that I tend to believe. I'm a Wisconsin fan. I mean, sue me for that. I feel very confident in what we're going to bring to the table next year.
Yeah, I'm mostly with you on it. I think people are underselling what Luke Fickell is and what he's proven. Like it's been out there, but I feel like it bears repeating. The dude brought Cincinnati to the playoffs. That just needs to be spoken a little bit.
They beat Notre Dame that year. I mean, we lost to Notre Dame that year. I don't know if you remember that game. Yeah, that was very painful. I was at it, and let's just say it was a very somber drive home.
Yeah, I remember that game. Despite how many IPAs I put in my body, I remember that game.
Nothing could erase the image in my brain of
like they
Notre
also
Dame guys returning
Bama didn't destroy them either. Like they fought against Bama in the playoffs. Like that was
Bama leveraged the one advantage they had, which was they had an offensive line that an AAC school couldn't compete with.
Yep. But aside from that,
that was the difference.
Aside from that, Cincinnati didn't look completely outclassed, and that's a complete compliment to Luke Fickell, Collins, this recruiting staff. I think my biggest takeaway again is I have no qualms if anybody's down on next year. Obviously, we always say everybody fan how you want to fan. There's no wrong perspectives. My biggest takeaway I continue to have though is I just don't think people need to fixate so much on year zero of Luke Fickell and say, it didn't work out. Now I'm not going to be as excited this year. It's certainly nothing wrong if that's the perspective you want to have. I think there's too much tie in there right now. And I think people are too worried about last year when looking at this year. I think they're complete, like you said, they're not just different books. They're in different libraries. It's completely different. And I think we're going to be a much better team this year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I just want to leave it on this. I think there's two other things that kind of go into that. It's just one, you project against the schedule we have, which is objectively a more difficult schedule than we've had in the past. But again, it's looking at that as forward projection. So how you want to evaluate a coach, if you're saying Luke Fickell's only a 6-5 worthy team, to me that's more of an indictment on the schedule we have versus the coach. Mm-hmm. But it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, but like Luke Fickell adds to the value of the team. So essentially, you're just saying you don't believe in him as a coach, right? If you're saying, well, we're just going to be 6-5. This is a coach that, from a national media perspective, everybody seems to think is an upgrade. But then you say, yeah, but it's not because he can't win games against good teams. That's just, to me, it's just a weird kind of discussion there, So I don't know. I mean, at the end of the day, I think we'll be better. I think that there's a lot going into next year that tells me that. And yeah, if people want to, feel how they want to feel, and by all means, that makes sense. I'll continue to argue against it in the Discord, but that's just kind of, what I see.
No, I love it, man. Curtis Holland dropping by. Won't be the last time we get him on the show if I'm lucky, but he is a great voice, great perspective as always. Always thrilled to have you on. Curtis, thank you so much, man.
Yeah, thank you.
On Wisconsin, and we will talk later.